Yeah, well, thank you for the invitation to be here. I love being with church planters, and but I don't get to be with American church planters very often. Most of my work is international. My role at Trinity is such that I really only teach. I have like a 3/4 teaching job, and the other quarter of my time is spent doing international work. So I spend 6 or 7 weeks out of the year traveling and doing workshops for church planters and training of trainers and that sort of thing. So. Yeah, but I'm really happy to be here with you and to see such a diverse group of people with a vision for the city. I love it. So thank you for the invitation. Maybe just a little more about who I am. I didn't just write that book. I don't just teach at Trinity. As I mentioned, I still do a lot of frontline grassroots church planter workshops and training and so on. We were 21 years in Germany. Most of those years we were church planters. We were involved in starting 4 churches there. Before going to Germany, we planted a church out in Schaumburg. So I am very in touch still with frontline challenges. The church I'm involved in now is more of a multi-site operation, and that's been also a good experience to see some of that firsthand. So that's just a little bit about my background. So leadership development. Why did I do my doctoral research on leadership development? Well, the first church we were involved in planting in Germany was like most church plants in Germany, 0 transfer growth. That's like foreign language. That's very, very rare. Maybe in some of the bigger cities you get some transfer, but generally, especially in smaller cities, it's going to be conversion growth or bust. I mean, you don't plant a church if you're not doing evangelism. So the church that we were involved in planting was a fairly small town, 35,000 to 40,000 people, very, very Roman Catholic. And we had some really rough-edged people who came to Christ, dramatic conversions. But how do you get from there to church elders? Much less church reproduction. That these people would go out and actually be involved in starting new churches. So we were having just challenge enough seeing these people develop into maturity and become leaders in a little local church plant. And out of that need, that's what, when I was doing my doctoral work, I decided that's really what I kind of need to work on. So my dissertation was on developing leaders, not at seminaries, but in the context of a local church. And not even so much thinking about developing a future pastor as much as somebody who could lead a Bible study, somebody who could just be on the church elder team. Let's start at that level. And that's what really motivated me. And so I'm going to share with you some of the things that, some of the concepts that I came up with and some of the things that mostly what we did actually. So, and I'll try and watch the time a little here because we are running late and I know Mark is going to have a lot to correct. He's going to need a lot of time. So, and I'm going to make this very ground level here. This is going to hopefully be very practical. Of course, temptation is the more practical it is, the more you say that doesn't apply to me because I'm in a different situation. So I'll take that chance. But most of you are going to be in a position, I'm sure, that you can take some of my ideas and make them much better for your situation. So the first handout I have here, these are printed 2-sided. So for the moment, just look on the front side of this one here with the triangle. So should be enough. Hope there's enough to go around. Is really just on different levels of ministry equipping. But I do want to just read one passage of scripture that is a real familiar one, but interestingly enough, even though it explicitly describes what pastors and evangelists and teachers are supposed to be doing, it shows up very seldom in a job description of a pastor, and that is equipping. So Ephesians 4, you know it. It says he gave, that is Christ gave some, starting at verse 11, who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers. Why? To prepare God's people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of fullness of Christ. That's what we want in our churches, right? People growing to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. How big is that? That's the goal. So God gives pastors, teachers, prophets, evangelists the goal. They were built up to be those kind of mature people. And what comes in between? He gave these people to equip the saints to get to there. If we think that it's just going to be a couple professionals that are going to be able to bring a church to that kind of maturity, we are going to be in big trouble. You better have a lot of money to hire a lot of people. We have to be mobilizing, equipping people from the grassroots up. In fact, I don't even usually like to use the word leadership development. I like servant development, because my philosophy is, you train a leader, you might get a big ego. You train a servant, you'll probably get a leader. Not every servant's going to be a leader to become an elder or a future pastor or church planter. But if we're training from the bottom up, from evangelism to discipleship, from discipleship to volunteering, serving, from serving in that level to becoming a leader of others who serve, moving up like that, that's how we're going to not only get a healthy church and make healthy disciples, that's how we're going to get to church reproduction. If we have not expanded our worker base, our disciple base, we're not going to be able to expand to new churches. So I find a lot of pastors, we all have our particular sweet spot, our gifting. Some are really gifted at evangelism, some are more gifted at teaching or disciple making, some are gifted at counseling. We'll gravitate to where our strength is. And the church will tend to get stuck wherever your strength is. Be alert to that. So if you're a teacher and you're a church planter, well, you do enough evangelism to get some people who you can teach. And then you're happy and go, now I got some people to teach. And you go to your teaching gift. And the church will kind of sit there because you're not doing more evangelism. Well, same thing, a person who's really gifted as evangelist. Not really very patient to do a lot of counseling and soul care. Well, let's go win the world. Quit crying. Let's just go, get the job done, right? Well, what's going to happen? You're going to have a lot of Christians who are still hurting. They're not going to be growing in maturity very well. So you need these different gifts, and you don't have all of them. Sorry for the news. But you don't have all those gifts. And you're going to have to look for people who do have those gifts and empower them. And especially if you don't have that gift, you say, well, how do I do that? Well, I'll give you some ideas along the way. If I'm not gifted at this, how do I help somebody else develop that gift? That's going to be important. So if you look at this triangle that on this side of the page here,
do you have more copies on the right?
your assistant was making, well, I got more copies of other points. Oh,
Okay.
no, this is something, this is mine.
To the right.
Oh, over here?
No.
Oh, actually, there are a few here. Okay,
Or can you
so
just
who's
make
missing?
more copies?
If somebody's missing, there are a few more copies.
Two handouts, right?
There's actually a couple handouts. Oh, I see what you did. They were collated. That's what happened. Okay, I didn't know that. Sorry. So go ahead. You should have 2 copies. Just take 2 copies. We'll take them one at a time. I didn't know that they were collated. Yeah. So anyway, for the moment,
It's 3 pages on.
there are
two
a
different
total of 3, but there's 2 sheets, and because one sheet is back to back. All right, so if you look at this triangle here, it's pretty basic. But so at the grassroots level, and especially most of you, if you're doing pioneer church planting with not a lot of transfer growth, this is where most of your people are, down at this bottom. They're new believers, or maybe they're young people, children of the church. They need to just discover what Christian character is, what it is to be a follower of Christ. They need to be saved, but then, so it's just sort of basic discipleship, what it means to live with Jesus. And that everybody needs, right? Now, as a person becomes a little more mature, and as a part of that discipling process, you're helping them learn how to serve. Because serving should not be like, well, discipleship first, and then draw a line, and when you reach that, then we'll worry about serving. But you actually grow through serving. So this is not that's not a hard line between these things. But as people begin to become involved in serving, whether they're leading a cell group or whether they're doing street evangelism or whether they're working with children or music and worship, whatever that is, you're wanting to be helping people discover how God has gifted them and helping equip them to use those gifts. Usually what sort of happens is we say, hey, you look like you're gifted at this or that, and we sort of push them in the deep end of the pool and hope they swim. Instead of getting in somehow alongside of them or putting somebody alongside of them that can help them really develop that. And because you see, if you push them in the deep end of the pool, what happens to other people standing around to the edge of the pool? They take a step back because they see that guy who got pushed in, he's kind of going under. And, wow, if I get involved in ministry, look what's going to happen to me. I'm going to be stuck and I'm not going to know what to do, and, I'm going to fail, or things are not going to go well. So if you want to have a culture of recruiting people to serve, you've got to give them the tools they need to succeed. And guess what? When you give them the tools they need to succeed, that motivates other people to want to serve. Because I believe most Christians want to serve. They want to be used by God, but they're afraid. They don't want to fail. They don't think they're qualified enough, and all those things. Well, if you can alleviate a lot of those fears and a lot of those reasons for not serving by helping your people succeed and helping them get connected in ministries that they're gifted at. So we're moving up. So now you've got volunteers. Now what they need to grow in character. They need to discover more what their gifts are and get some of those basic skills to be able to serve. And then we're talking about leaders of others. So this would be your cell group leaders. So they're responsible for leading a ministry. They're not just serving in a ministry. They're not, say, a Sunday school teacher, but they're the leader of the Sunday school group or something like that. A cell group leader, worship team leader. Now they're going to need something different because they need not just the basic skills of teaching a Sunday school class or leading worship. They need to know how to develop others. So they need leadership skills, spiritual caregiving skills, because they're leading another team. And they need to see that as their job, not just to have a better worship team, but that they're developing people. Now, if you look at some of those books like the Fergusons, Exponential, they've got an amazing pipeline of the way they develop people up through the church. And so that's what we're talking about. People who are not only serving, but knowing how to develop other people and lead their teams. And that's a different kind of skill. And then at the very top of this, you have sort of the pastors and elders who have the most spiritual responsibility. They're going to need the most advanced kinds of exemplary character and different kinds of leadership skills too. And that's where you're going to get your future planters from. Now, some of the people who are in other parts of this pyramid will be some of the co-workers that might go out if you launch a daughter church. But you're going to need the key leaders here. Now, we decided we could see in Germany, if we wait around to have full salaries and seminary-trained church planters, we're never going to get anywhere close to having this job done. We've got to shift to mobilizing lay church planters, and then if the church grows to a point where they can pay somebody, all the better. But tent makers, lay church planters, and so we began to develop that pipeline. One of the churches we planted was pretty much a lay-driven church. I just coached the people who were leading that for the first couple of years. And they did most of the preaching. I preached once a month once they kind of got going. But we needed to get a model going of how to really get multiplication from the grassroots up and not just hiring in from the outside. So this is why if we want to get to church reproduction, much less multiplication, you've got to have a pipeline, a leadership pipeline. And you have to be intentional about it. The tyranny of the urgent will always take over. And so the question you need to ask is, how intentional am I being about developing not only the future leaders in this church, but the future leaders of the church at large, the next planters and so on. So that's that. So what are some of those tools? So now if you turn that sheet over, there's like these three tables. And again, just very quick, you can look this over in detail later, but I'm just going to introduce very quickly three different sort of equipping models, as it were, in the context of the local church. Now, the first one would be probably the most familiar, and this would be more of an individual approach, modeling, coaching, mentoring. So basically, it's going to be either one-on-one or with just a small group. Jesus, by the way, didn't do one-on-one. He had one-on-three, Peter, James, and John. And there is a dynamic there that's to be spoken for. But be that as it may, we're talking about a more individualized approach. Now, the modeling is sort of, if you're familiar with the model, assist, watch, leave sort of thing. It's for basic, simple skills, hospital visitation, how to share the gospel. It's pretty good for those kinds of things, but you're not going to get into a lot of character development with that. Coaching is a little more of a skill-oriented thing about how to do a ministry. And so you're going to come alongside of a person, observe, have some modeling and some information you give them, but it's more skill-based. Whereas the mentoring is really getting a lot more into the spiritual development of the person, a lot more personal interaction, character development, and so on. So obviously you can't do that with very many people. But you can do it with some. And I think this is something where you may have to get your church to understand. You can't do this with everybody, and if somebody says you're playing favorites, you just say, well, that's what Jesus did, I'm sorry. But this is about developing. I can't do that with everybody, but they can do it with somebody else. It's hopefully reproducing. And it may be shorter term for a basic skill. It may be longer term over a period of years if you're mentoring somebody for high-level leadership. So most of you are pretty familiar with that. I won't say anything more about that. I want to go to the second one, workshops. So a workshop, most people who think they're doing a workshop are doing a talk shop. A workshop is when you actually get your hands dirty. You actually do it. So when we take like a Saturday and do a lay preaching workshop. We said if we're going to plant churches with lay people, they got to know how to preach. You mentioned preaching. And so we do a Saturday-long workshop on how to prepare a sermon. And guess what? At the end of that day, they had a basic sermon outline. Now, don't tell my friends at Trinity I just said that. But we're talking about multiplication here, and so we'd have table groups, and each table group would have a Bible text. We'd kind of go through the steps of how you'd prepare a sermon, and they'd work with a Bible text. They'd get flip chart paper, and they'd write outlines, and they'd work it through. And one of the requirements, by the way, to even participate in those workshops, you're going to preach in a church. The motivation shifts when you do that. It's not, because sometimes you do these workshops and I'm kind of bored and I got nothing else to do, I'll go do this. No, it's always going to be directly related to implementing it in real ministry. So you want the workshop to be very practical, hands-on. They're actually getting a little practice with the kind of skill you're developing, and then giving them a place to where they can actually implement that. Ideally, you've got a coach or somebody who'll kind of help them, watch them, give them feedback. But the workshop, it might be a Saturday, it might be several evenings, for a couple of weeks. But it's very geared usually to some sort of specific kind of ministry skill. It might be people who are just getting new, they're new to ministry, and they're just kind of getting the basics. You might have a more advanced workshop. So I mentioned lay preaching workshops. We do sort of evangelism workshops, Sunday school people that do workshops for the Sunday school workers. And so that's the workshop approach. And I find that, again, a lot of churches don't do that much. So it's just about being intentional. The one I have found most interesting and in many ways the most effective is the third one, and I know very few churches that actually do this, and that is equipping people in the context of the ministry team meeting. So for example, if your ministry team, it's a worship team, it's the cell group leaders, whoever they are, you got your regular meeting, quarterly meeting, monthly meeting, or whatever it is, what do you usually do in those meetings? Well, do a lot of planning. Who's going to buy the food, what are the dates, what's the schedule, you do a lot of that kind of stuff. And, it's Murphy's Law. That business stuff will expand to fill the amount of time you have for it. So my approach, and everything I'm telling you, I have done. This is not make-believe here. This is all stuff we've done in our church plans. We said for any team meeting, if you say your average team meeting is, say, 2 hours, we're going to spend the first hour on something related to helping those people in that team do their ministry better. We might read a chapter of a book and discuss it. You got to keep it manageable because they're not seminary students. You can't overburden them with, tons of homework. If they're motivated, fine, but most people are just only going to have so much time. So, and especially like I'm not a gifted counselor type person. Pastors have to do it, but if our church was going to be cared for, I was going to have to get a team of people that would be more the soul care people. And so, they knew I wasn't that gifted at it. So what do? Well, we'll read a chapter of a book each time once a month when we get together. We'll invite somebody in who is gifted at this, or somebody else went to a training thing. Come back, tell you what you learned. Do case studies, kick it around, do peer learning. I don't have to be the expert. There's people in the room that never even read a book, but they're good at it. So you get the peers working here. So this is all happening in the regularly scheduled team meeting. So nobody's saying, oh, another night of the week where I'm not at home. Well, if they were going to be at the team meeting anyway, use the time wisely. So we would spend about an hour doing these kinds of things, helping them be more effective at their ministry. Read a chapter of a book, invite somebody in, do peer learning, do evaluation of what you've been doing, help one another where you see your strengths and where can you improve. You know, the worship leaders, we do this kind of thing. So you're being very intentional about helping them succeed. And this is empowering. When people are empowered, they're going to be more motivated and they're going to be more effective. And you're modeling reproduction by doing that. So individual development, you know, identifying, you know, the 2, 3, 4, however many people in your, you know, pensum, whatever your level is, that you can actually spend time mentoring or coaching. The workshops, you know, figure it out. What are the needs of the church? And saying, well, we haven't done this for a while, let's do this. No, you look at what are the needs in the church. We need more cell group leaders. We need more Sunday school workers. We need to be more intentional about evangelism. So you look at the needs of the church and then you train to the need. It's another way to keep it very practical and highly motivated. And then ministry teams, they're doing it anyway. Because they're in service, they usually want to know how to do their ministry better. They're already involved in it. It's like in-service learning. So those are sort of these three formats. I mean, there's many other ways to do leadership, worker development. I'm just pointing these out as maybe a couple of these are forms you haven't maybe thought much about. Okay, this is the fire hose approach right now, but I'm just thinking about the time, and Mark will talk a little, and we'll have Q&A. So, okay, so now you can take the third sheet, and this is just what we did in the North Munich church plant. And Jeff here actually did sort of a brief summer internship in this church and one of the other churches I was involved with in Munich. So this is the real deal, what we were doing. Now I know what some of you are thinking right now. I said, well, you know, if I did all that, I'd have no time for anything else. But believe it or not, it's really not the case. You would be surprised, because if you're reproducing your ministry in others, that sets you free from doing a lot of other things. If you've got other people that can do a lot of counseling, other people that can do some of the teaching or the preaching, that not only sets a signal of empowerment, it frees you up. So, okay, so this is just, you know, the specifics of kind of our plan. Now this church at this point is probably maybe around 100 adults and 20 or 30 kids. So this is not a big church, okay? And we were very lean and mean about what was going to be the priority. We said cell groups and worship. Anything else is bonus, and if that extra is taking you away from cell group or worship, it might not be happening anymore. So we were very lean about the demands that we expected of people. Okay, so to me, the key, we were a cell-based church, and the absolute key was if you're going to be a cell church, you've got to equip your cell leaders. If you're truly being a cell church where you're delegating the pastoral care, primary care, into the cell groups, if those cell group leaders aren't able to give primary care, well, the whole system breaks down, and then they end up knocking at the pastor's door. So if you really want to have a multiplying cell church, and those cells become the basis for church plants, you've got to, my highest priority was equipping the cell group leaders. So we actually had a monthly cell group leader meeting. People would say to me, how do you get them to come once a month? We'd say, well, once a month we cancel our cell groups. It's that much of a priority, gives everybody a little break. Second of all, when they come, they know they're going to get something that helps them. We're not going to go blah, 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 blah for 2 hours. We're going to say, what are the needs? Oh man, we got a moral problem in my cell group. How do I deal with that? Okay, here's a need. Anybody else have something like that? Okay, let's make that our topic. Somebody else says, you know, our Bible study is boring. We're not really doing, we're talking about the Bible. We're not getting any real discipleship in our group. Wow, great topic. Anybody else challenge? Okay, here's topic. We'll do next couple months when we meet. See what's happening here? We're giving them what they need to succeed. It's sounding like a broken record here. So we would meet once a month. We'd have a time of motivation, prayer, vision casting, and then some organizational things, but primarily helping work through challenges they're facing, giving them tools they need. Second one was mentoring two men in the church. One was already a church elder. He was already a leader. We had reached 7 cell groups. And I went to a Bob Logan. Anybody, old timers, remember the name Bob Logan? I was at a workshop with him. He said, when you get to 5 cell groups, you need another leader of cell groups. And we were at 7, and I was basically each cell group had a leader, but I was the leader of the 7 leaders. And we looked at, and all our people looked at each other and said, that's where we're at. We need more. Wow. So one of those elders was a person I was going to coach on how to coach cell group leaders. So he's going to be the we call him Springer in German, the bouncer. He'd bounce around to the cell groups and coach these guys. So I was mentoring him. He was an elder. He was leading a cell group himself. He was good at it. He who's faithful in small things, what? You entrust with greater things. So you look for the people at the lower level of that pyramid who are really faithful, and they might just be faithful setting up chairs. They're the ones you want to look for, and then get them in their gifting and moving forward. So here's a guy who's got a healthy cell group. He's been faithful. He's gifted. Got a pastoral heart. I'm going to train that guy. I'm going to mentor him on how to be a mentor to cell group leaders. And then the other one was a younger guy. Long story, dramatic conversion, very dramatic conversion. I don't know if you remember Karl-Heinz Stammke, if you remember that name, but dramatic conversion and just straight shooter, character-wise, and I was mentoring him for long-term growth. He eventually did become a church elder, but at that time he was pretty much a new believer. So I said, those are going to be the 2 men that, for the next period of time, focus on them. Ministry workshops, I just mentioned we would do 2 or 3 times a year. Again, very need-based as a way to recruit new workers, give them some basic skills. We're not just going to push you in the deep end of the pool. We'll give you, here'll be a workshop. You can kind of learn what it's about. And then, so we do a couple of those a year. And then coaching a ministry team leader. So this is a little different than the mentoring. So in this particular case, it was the leader of the worship team. And we're trying to develop an ethos of worship in the church that didn't quite fit the traditional mold of that denomination. And so I led that worship team. They'd meet once a month. And then the guy who was kind of the natural leader for it, I kind of was coaching him to take it over. And then basically he took over the worship team, and other than giving them maybe sermon topics or whatever was coming up, that was delegated then. So he was a guy I coached for that. Well, then I just mentioned the counseling. So that was the example of that where, what you don't do, especially with counseling, is say, anybody want to come to a counseling training or counselor workshop? Because guess who comes? Everybody who needs counseling shows up for those things. Which doesn't mean they couldn't be a counselor. But so what I do is I go to the cell group leaders. By the way, that's point 7. I go to the cell group leaders and say, who are the go-to people in your cell group? It might not be you. But when somebody's hurting, there's always that person that people just go to because they got that warm heart, they're good listeners, and got a gift of compassion. I say, who are your go-to people? Give me those names. So I get these names, and then I invite these people to a meeting and say, you know what? A lot of people are coming to you with issues, and you don't know what to say or how to respond to this stuff. And would you like to come to a monthly meeting to help you learn how to be a better caregiver? Like, of course I would want to do something like that. So we started this monthly meeting of basically hand-picked people who were already basically doing counseling. So we're not talking about therapeutic counseling here. This is just, basic stuff. So we'd meet once a month with them. And then, like I said, our cell groups are sort of the testing grounds for who has what gifts. It's not that threatening to lead a Bible discussion with a group of 10 people who you know. It's a lot more threatening to preach a sermon to 100 people. So you start, with small ministries. Are people faithful in a cell group service? Are they faithful in these smaller ministries? And so if we need somebody, and it can be something very practical, somebody that can help with organizational things. And so in our cell group leader meetings here, point one of the things we would do is when we say there's particular needs for serving, instead of putting an announcement in the bulletin, which nobody would read, in our cell group meeting, we'd say, hey, we really need somebody who's good at this. Anybody know somebody that's not already overworked? Because they know their people. And so then, when you identify a person like that, then we have a cell group leader. We try and push everything as much as possible in the cell groups. Talk to that person. Would you affirm them and say, hey, I've noticed you're good at organizational stuff. We need somebody that we're planning this evangelistic outreach. We need somebody who's just really good at kind of practically getting things lined up and organized. And, I think you're pretty good at that. You seem like the kind of person to be good at that. Would you be willing to serve in that way? See, that's a lot different than the announcement in the bulletin. Nobody shows up, or getting the people who are already overburdened serving, and then you burn them out. So, okay, so I've talked more than long enough.
Let's do it this way if we can.